Yeah. Was there any other locations in Savannah that you?
Yeah, there's another location which is actually only a couple of blocks away from the Sorrel Weed House,
Hmm.
and it's called the Moon River Brewing Company.
Oh, I have heard of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and originally it was the very first hotel in Savannah
Hmm.
in 1821, and it was called the City Hotel, which makes me laugh
Yes.
because,
Well,
boy, a lot of thought went into that name, didn't it? The
I
City
guess
Hotel.
I guess you
Whoa.
couldn't go wrong, right? It's like,
Yeah,
where do you stay when you go to Savannah? The City Hotel.
yeah. So, anyways, today it's a microbrewery, a pub, a restaurant,
Okay.
and this building has been featured on several of the popular paranormal TV shows.
Right.
And you are well aware of my opinion of what a lot of those shows are. So I don't hold their evidence that they've acquired on these shows to any high regard. But so what I think where the hauntings in the Moon River brewery comes from
Right.
is that in 1876 there was an outbreak of yellow fever that went
Mm,
through Savannah,
right.
and that building was used as a hospital
Okay.
during that epidemic. So again, I think you've got all of this residual energy that's just coming forth
Right.
from this yellow fever epidemic that went through there.
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm just looking at some information here too, right? So the City Hotel was and is it's considered one of the most beautiful buildings in Savannah. It's been a landmark since it was first built. And so let's just see. So it said the City Hotel closed in 1864. So in terms of the actual hotel, it was really only in business well, it went into business in 1822. So about 40 years. Yes, and then it became, it does say that there was little before General Sherman took Savannah during the Civil War. The City Hotel never reopened after the war, and the building has been open, essentially just historic since that point. It's never been a hotel again, but it has seen quite a few owners. There are many people who can tell you that the ghosts left behind died tragic or violent deaths. If it's true, the Moon River Brewing Company is a haunted place. Enough violence has taken place inside the building to leave several spirits behind. And of course, there's literally all the hundreds of children that died there. So there was also apparently a shooting of a town vagrant in 1832. A doctor by the name of Dr. Philip Minus shot a drunk man named James Stark inside the hotel. He was a known drunk and troublemaker who seemed to have a reputation for insulting people. Minus shot Stark, insisted he had seen Stark going for his gun first. He was quickly acquitted as Stark was not liked in the town. So yeah, there just seems to be a lynch mob that marched through the city and into the hotel and dragged a gentleman by the name of Sinclair out. He was the anger and hate. So he was a Yankee. So they literally beat him near to death there inside the hotel. So yeah, it seems to have all kinds of fun activity in there. Anyways, let's take a little trip to New Orleans. So when we first started going to New Orleans, it was right after Katrina, and Ed had been there before. He'd gone there, and in the late 70s and other times. I had never been. There's some areas in the Old View Carré that are really interesting, and one story comes to mind. We were there, I don't even know how many years ago it was now. Gosh, it seems not that long ago, but I'm going to say it was probably 6 years ago, maybe. Could have been longer. And a couple of our friends had come into town, and we went over to visit another friend. And she happened to live in a part of the Vieux Carré that is not touristy. It's north of Bourbon Street. It's sort of between Bourbon and Rampart, and a little bit closer to St. Philip. So it was an area where it's more residential, even though you're right in the quarter. And so she lived in a typical shotgun style house where you come in the front door and you enter into a living room of sorts. And then there's either an open concept or a hallway that'll run down one side of the house in literally a straight line. And I mean, the shotgun was essentially you could open the front door and, sort of fire a gun, and it would go straight through and out the back. Because in New Orleans, people didn't have, like Savannah, it gets hot as Hades there.
Oh, yeah.
So, that concept was the easiest way to keep an airflow going through the house, right? The houses are raised off the ground to allow for airflow underneath. And also, you were able to open up windows down one side of the house, and this hallway or, open concept rooms going back with a back door would allow for air circulation. So her house was very much like that. We came in, there was a front room. I believe her second room in was the kitchen, and then the bedroom and that going back. Now, a lot of them, you come in, there's a sitting room, but then you have bedrooms, and then the kitchen's at the back of the house, which makes sense because when it's hot, you could open up and literally cook outside if you needed to, right? So in those times, you would have been cooking in a fireplace, essentially a cooking hearth, or outside. So it makes sense for it to be at the back of the house, away from everything else, right? It's not heating up the house. So we came in, we sat down. A really, really good friend of ours was there, and he's since passed on. And he was just such an amazing person, just in general. I've never met anybody like this guy. He was just the most caring, forgiving, wonderfully energy sort of emitting human being that I've ever met. And he was an amazing tarot card reader. And so we were there, and our friend was with us. And when we arrived at the house, I'd never been to the house before. And so we arrived at the house, and we went inside and we sat down, and the room was kind of filled with people who emit certain energies, right? We all have our own very strong energy. Most of us were mediums or psychics of some sort in the room. And our friend who was with us, she's pretty sensitive, but she, there was, I think she said after the fact, there was times when she felt like she just wanted to get up and run out of the house. It was just too much for her. But what I found that was really weird and strange was, as I was sitting there, I kept envisioning something that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I was like, I keep on seeing people, lots of people, but it wasn't people walking around, it was people lying down. And I was like, okay. So after this, we visited for a few hours, and we kind of left, and we were walking back. Our other friend, who the second gentleman, was talking, and he said, oh yeah. And I said, can I ask you a question? Why am I seeing this? And he sort of laughed, and he goes, oh, because her house is built on a cemetery. So at that time, when New Orleans was first being built, originally it was within the walls of the old quarter, right? The area now where there's a seawall, and then there was the nuns lived a convent. There was the convent, and then it was surrounded by walls for protection, right? This small area, it wasn't very big at all. And so outside of that was where they would bury people. They didn't bury them within the wall area of the city. So on the outside. So at that time, in the late 1700s, there was like rampant yellow fever. There was a number of other things that were happening. So there was a lot of burials outside the walls of the old part of what is now known as the French Quarter. And so I didn't I mean, I kind of knew, but I didn't really put two and two together, just that it had really extended that far outside. But yeah, apparently there was these houses were built in the 1800s on top of cemeteries, old cemeteries that they didn't really have any markers or anything. I guess they were more like mass burials from yellow fever and that. And so they would dig them outside of the living, the area where people lived and bury them there. So that kind of really, once I heard that, I was like, oh, well, that energy just makes complete sense then of what I was
Yeah.
picking up in the house. But the other interesting thing is that some years ago, not too long ago, 3 4 maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they were building a boutique hotel right in the same area where we happened to be at that time. And they were digging in the back to put in a swimming pool. And what did they dig up?
Hmm.
Bodies, right? So it was an extension of quite a few blocks, like maybe 4 blocks that this old cemetery had been had taken up, and literally none of these places, these older homes, have basements in New Orleans. There's no basements, so you're just building right on ground level, raised and on block, and away you go. So you've got all these homes that were built, so they would never know if it was not marked on a map, or maybe it was, and people just built anyways, right? They were expanding outwards, and that cemetery was no longer being used, and probably hadn't been used in maybe 40 years. So they figure, what the heck, right? We'll just build on top of it. What people don't know, it doesn't, it doesn't hurt them. But definitely that area, every time I walk through there, it's just, for me, it's just so active. Like there is just so much energy and so much, it's like sometimes I'll be walking down the road, and it could be whenever in the evening, it's and be walking. And we used to stay in an apartment on St. Anne near Rampart Street. So we used to walk all the time. Like we never drove around there. It's like, who drives? So we would walk, and sometimes I'd just be walking at night, and I'd turn a corner on the street, and I just see people that, from 100 years ago, 150 years ago, just doing regular people things. It wasn't, like they weren't running up to me and going, oh, or anything ridiculous. It was just sort of like this weird walking into another dimension of time, and there would be things happening, and then off you go. And a lot of times the houses that we were walking by were there, but sometimes they weren't, depending on where we were walking. So this is
Yeah.
kind of a really weird thing, right? I mean, for me, I'm kind of used to being able to walk through those kinds of situations and not get really freaked out. I just kind of listen. I just open everything up, and I just walk, right? And I just listen to what I can hear, the conversations that I hear, and I just keep going, and I just go, well, that was really cool, right? I just was privy to something that happened 100 years ago, and just keep going.